Hello guys, my name is Dean, aka the Blue Crusader, and welcome back to the channel. I recently watched episode 9, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and decided it was essential I made a review on my personal thoughts about the movie, as to outline the pros and cons of the experience, and highlight any plot holes I found when watching it. Warning, this review will contain spoilers from the movie, and in the spirit of not wanting to ruin the movie for those who haven't yet seen it, you've been warned. Without further ado, let's dive into the video. First of all, let me jump into the feel of the movie. Many fans were left in disdain after watching episode 8 The Last Jedi. There were those that thoroughly loved the movie and those that hated it. Personally, I'm somewhere in between. The lines are slightly blurred and it's not black and white. I think The Last Jedi, perhaps with the middle of the movie cut out, could have been a decent movie. But it definitely had its weaknesses and it made the setup for episode 9 pretty disastrous. I would say that to anyone who is a fan of episode 7 The Force Awakens though, will be a fan of episode 9 as well. I believe for the most part episode 9 was a good conclusion to the new Disney trilogy, and JJ Abrams did a good job with the hand he was given after episode 8, which created a less than stellar setup to finish the story. For me, it mostly caps off the 3 films with a conclusive ending, and although I will highlight many of the plot holes and not just the positives but also the negatives in this review, I think it was impossible not to have plot holes in this movie due to the lack of explanation for the various narrative pieces in the previous 2 films. In this review, I will briefly cover sections of the narrative that I'm addressing, but as with some reviews in the past, I won't directly gloss over the movie or give a full synopsis of what happens, as the majority of the people watching this review have either seen the movie or don't want a full story repeating it. So I will make the story as brief as possible, although longer segments may be crucial to compare and review certain aspects of the movie, although I won't go over and explain every little detail by telling the full story. The story follows the heroes as they discover a new threat, driven by Palpatine himself, who has, in the events between Return of the Jedi and now, has seemingly cheated death through the use of the dark side of the Force and created a new threat called the Final Order, which is basically an immense fleet of Star Destroyers with planet-killing capabilities, dwarfing the power of the Death Star once more, like the Starkiller base initially did in episode 7. For me, this was an awesome nod to the comics, as we finally get to see Palpatine's true immense power that the expanded universe content, which is the non-canon material such as various comics, books and media before the Disney era, covered initially. The way Palpatine survives is not entirely explained, although the average hardcore fan gains enough intel to make that bridge between it and form their own explanation, although perhaps to the casual fan this may not be the case. In the expanded universe, Palpatine extends his life through the use of cloning by transferring his essence and spirit to the cloned bodies through the Force. This is similar to how it is managed in the movie, as Palpatine is revealed to be cloning, but his life is extended through the use of the dark side secrets he presumably discovers, which I will more heavily cover in lore videos explaining what really happened. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're seeking answers after watching this movie. Basically, the rebellion via the spy, which ends up being very much unlikable General Hux, discover the Final Order fleet in the Emperor's return. To me, it kind of felt almost surreal and unrealistic how the reaction to the Emperor's return was. There was not much disbelief or sense of dread. It almost felt like the Emperor returning was something that could easily happen, and that everyone knew the dark side was just that powerful. I just feel like the characters should have found out in another way or reacted differently. Palpatine, through discovering dark side secrets and being aided by the previous generations of Sith, enacts his plan. One thing I loved is how Palpatine is almost possessed but not controlled, rather used as a vessel to gain power from the previous generations of dead Sith that he teases inhabit his body, possibly in my view granting him the newfound vitality to cheat death. It was also nice how this tied in with episode 3, as he previously told Anakin the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural, a line which he repeated in this movie along with many other iconic lines, and one that he told in conjunction with the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise, who allegedly learned to cheat death. He told Anakin this in episode 3 as Anakin was searching to save Padme after his vision of her death, and Palpatine claimed he knew the secret through the dark side, but later claiming they could both discover it together. However, now with Palpatine cheating death for real, it poses the question, did Palpatine learn to cheat death from his master Plagueis, who could now be canon, and he knew it all along and chose not to help Anakin? Or did he discover it later during the Empire's reign in his contingency to save himself upon death? It's not yet known. The thing I most loved was the introduction of the brand new Sith planet Exegol that was explored in this movie. This was the planet that Palpatine was on. Now, a lot of people, especially casual fans, wonder how did Palpatine go undetected for so long on this planet and why didn't we know of this threat? Well, that's where it gets interesting. This planet lies in a place called the Unknown Regions. This is a place that is, for the most part, undiscovered or explored by the majority of the galaxy and thus not shown on star charts, which are basically space maps. This serves as a place of great secrets and created a perfect, undetected place for Palpatine to hide out whilst he enacted his plan and his fleet became realised and gained strength. The fact that Exegol was not fully explained in the movie leaves the planet shrouded in mystery, which created a perfect sense of dread and darkness around the Sith and Palpatine, and it shows him as an immense puppet master and puller of strings of the previous events. This is very much so in the sense that Kylo Ren discovers this planet through Palpatine's echoes in the Force. It shows Palpatine as the master manipulator, as it was revealed Palpatine was behind Snoke, as we see various Snoke bodies and parts in the cloning facility, perhaps owing to the fact that Snoke was cloned and that Palpatine had been string pulling all this time. But one thing that was good for me is how he is definitely broken and a shattered being after his death. Sidious was shown as almost a weakened old man with white eyes and weakened in body but not spirit. It was interesting to see him gain power throughout this movie, and how they explored Force balance was very good for me. I like how when Kylo and Rey ganged up on Palpatine at the end, the Force almost created a balance, as dark and light must always be in existence for balance, which is why the Emperor gained immense power from their life force, as his eyes turn yellow and red like in Revenge of the Sith, and he shocks the whole fleet of ships with crazy levels of Force lightning, really showing that he's the most powerful Sith and the successor of a 1,000-year lineage, showing all of the previous Sith within him having immeasurable power. My favourite part was when he used the Force Storm on the whole Starfleet, one of the most awesome scenes and a really great example of how CGI can be applied to a film to just make it look breathtaking. The redemption arc of Kylo Ren into Ben Solo once more will be a great answer for fans, and we learn in one of the new comics that Snoke was the one to burn Luke's Jedi Temple, not Kylo, which is another answer we receive, albeit not from the films. I think it was handled very well how Kylo comes to the dark side, and it was almost killing two birds with one stone in the way that they brought him to the light in this movie. First of all, they handled the death of Leia and Kylo being redeemed at the same time, although this was only one part of the whole redemption story that they actually crafted. So Leia passed away and through the Force reached out to Kylo by simply saying Ben during his fight with Rey. As Kylo puts down his saber, in this moment he begins to slowly lose faith in the dark side and comes close to balance. Rey drives her saber through him in a dark side rage, although she comes to her senses as she used the Force to heal him. This is a great nod actually to how the Mandalorian made Force mending canon, a power that Jedis can heal through the Force. One thing we saw Baby Yoda actually do in the show multiple times so far. And the way Leia was emplaced in this movie certainly did justice to Carrie Fisher, who sadly passed away a few years ago. Instead of inserting her with CGI like they did in Rogue One, one thing that they had to do because they needed to have the episode 4 young version of her in the film, this film actually uses old deleted scenes and unused footage which was supposedly supposed to be used for episode 7. They do this to insert her in as a character. Sure, it limited what could be done with her as a whole, and it probably limited the writing, but it seemed much more organic and realistic this way, and I think it was handled well and respected her legacy. A lot of people said that you could easily tell that she was put in this way and she didn't really fit in with the scenes, but for me, this is probably just the effect of people already knowing this beforehand, as this was a fact that Disney had already released. I think when watching the film for the first time in a non-biased way, I couldn't really tell so much. And in episode 8, Leia mysteriously flies through space after being ejected from her ship, coming back to safety before falling into a comatized state. This was received very poorly by fans, but the Rise of Skywalker sews up this plot hole by showing that Leia was indeed training to be a Jedi and very much Force sensitive, although stopped her training when she saw a vision of her son's death at the end of her Jedi journey. This shows how she could train Rey and how she could use the Force to somehow fly through space. The There really just doesn't seem to be any limit to the Force's potential in the Disney movies. Now, one thing I absolutely loved is how Han Solo returned as Force memory to Kylo Ren. This is the method they used to finally redeem him, and the second part of how his redemption story ends, like I mentioned before. Through his parents he came back to their light, but both were dead, and the only way he could actually be redeemed is by their forgiveness and their passing, but he needed to see them, so through the Force, Han also returned. This scene was almost a direct mirror of episode 7 when Han was alive, as he tried to bring his son back to his senses from the dark side. But this time, things go slightly different. Instead of driving the saber through his father, Kylo finds forgiveness through Han and discards his saber, basically becoming Ben Solo once again, and the shroud of the dark side falling from him. He then aids Rey in trying to defeat the Emperor, and it's one of the best redemption arcs I've seen. I must say this was very well handled, and I think it was actually one of the best segments of the film, and I think they did a great job on it. The connection between Kylo and Rey made the characters very strong. Although they didn't have any kind of blood relation, they did work off of each other very nicely, as they could talk to each other through the Force, and both used each other to find a balance and finally work with each other as Jedi to defeat the Emperor in the end. Something really interesting when they both had a lineage or fate that was supposed to end in the dark side. It's interesting how the prophecy was for them both to become Sith and rule, but both came out as Jedi to defeat the Sith. It was a really interesting flip on what you thought could have happened. Rey's family lineage was finally answered, with a popular fan theory of her being a Palpatine, more specifically his granddaughter, finally being confirmed. However, this was briefly answered, and my one gripe is that it was not fully explained or explored. It would seem that Palpatine, from my take from watching the movie, had a son or illegitimate son of sorts, and then the son hid his Force-sensitive child, who would end up being Rey. But Palpatine ordered the death of his son, or the two parents, for allegedly not allowing the child to come to Palpatine and hiding it, and maybe for them being Force sensitive, we don't know. But if Palpatine had a son, was he not Force sensitive too? It leaves much to wonder about, and it was not solidified or explored, so I deem that as a huge plot hole. But at least we get a brief answer as to Rey's origin, something that we were waiting for since episode 7 and really didn't receive any form of answer in episode 8 whatsoever, as it kind of went on its own tangent. I'm sure the majority can agree that Luke Skywalker was almost destroyed as a character in The Last Jedi. He completely throws out the Jedi faith and has nothing to do with it, basically dying alone on an island, leaving most of us pretty disappointed. Now, I slightly enjoyed The Last Jedi, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like one segment of the film could have been entirely ejected, I'm talking about the casino scene, and other things could have been different and it would have been a good movie. It wasn't entirely terrible, but there was some parts which definitely did ruin Luke as a character. But in my opinion, The Rise of Skywalker, although it can't change Luke's demise or final moments in the episode 8 setup, it does actually do justice to Luke. We see him come back as a Force ghost with a restored faith in the Jedi Order, as he should, seeing his past mistakes. He also, in Yoda-style fashion, helps to raise his X-Wing out of the waters for Rey to use. This was also a really good reference to the film that I enjoyed. There was a lot of Easter eggs and references in the movie, and I will definitely be making a video on each and every single one of them that I actually noticed. One thing that I think made this movie much stronger than The Last Jedi is how all of the heroes seemingly had the same end goal and were not sidetracked or going on different simultaneous missions or objectives. In The Last Jedi, Finn and Rose randomly journey to a gambling planet called Canto Blight, which many fans thought was a pointless segment of the movie that wasted time and really had no significance. This doesn't happen in this movie. Everyone is in the same place, which leaves for little unnecessary confusion. As usual, the CGI and special effects were top notch. It was kind of strange as I wasn't really paying full attention to the CGI and visuals in this movie, although I could definitely still appreciate them. I was more so captivated by the story. All of the explosions gave a big kick and the spaceships look realistic. I would say the use of practical effects also was a positive, something that we saw in episode 7, basically meaning real costumes are used for many of the aliens, making them look more organic and believable. The special effects in space were stellar, making the experience extremely captivating, and the Force lightning from Palpatine really showed how powerful he was. Hats off to the special effects department. Now that I've explained my many countless reasons why I enjoyed it, let's jump onto the negatives and mainly the huge plot holes which definitely needed sewing together but didn't. First of all, Luke's lightsaber has had a huge place in the new trilogy, although one thing that bothered me a little bit is how did Luke's saber get fixed? During a battle with Kylo Ren, Rey sees the saber crack in half and she takes the damaged saber back. However, the lightsaber lightsaber returns in its full restored form, but we don't get an answer how this is. Does Leia, after being confirmed as previous Jedi after the Battle of Endor, help her repair it? How do they repair the lightsaber crystals in the canon universe? Next is Rey's parents. I covered this mostly earlier, so I will only gloss over it briefly. Who were Rey's parents specifically? Did her mother have any significance, or was she just some kind of farm woman? It seems evident that her father was a Palpatine, seeming to be his son, whether illegitimate or not. Did he utilize the Force or have any powers? Was he a Jedi or just an exile? In the expanded universe material that's non-canon, Palpatine had an illegitimate son in a series of works called the Jedi Prince series, so perhaps inspiration was taken from that story. At the end of the movie, we see Rey bury Luke and Leia's sabers. However, she then can be seen with an orange or yellow one that's entirely new. But how did she get this lightsaber? Did she make it, or did she find it by scavenging? We know in the Clone Wars era and many years before, these sabers were only used by Jedi Sentinels, namely the Temple Guardians on Coruscant. So did Rey seek this out as an artifact, or did she create it? Kyber crystals, aka the Jedi's lightsaber crystals, are extremely rare, with the Empire literally harvesting almost all of them to create the Death Star's planetary destruction beam, and with every ship in Palpatine's fleet with the same capabilities, it's evident these crystals were mass harvested for the same purpose. So how did Rey find such a crystal if she made this new lightsaber? If you've played Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, you even get to play on the planet Ilum, where the Jedi found the crystals in the caves, and you get to see the Empire invade Ilum and start their mining operation. This really needs to be answered. Perhaps she purified a red crystal. Now there's two potential ones that she could have done this. One on Luke Skywalker's necklace that she wore, or the discarded red lightsaber from Kylo Ren. Maybe she used the Force to create a light side crystal using one of these. Another plot hole is how did Maz Kanata on Takodana in episode 7 come into possession of Luke's lightsaber? Sure, there's many possibilities, but we didn't get any kind of substantial answer to this. Luke lost faith in the Jedi Order, so it isn't far-fetched that he discarded it or threw it away like Kylo Ren did with his Sith saber in this movie, or buried it perhaps and a scavenger found it, possibly ending in Maz's hands, or perhaps Luke gave it to her for safekeeping, or even sold it and saw it as valueless. But it needs solidifying, because after seeing The Last Jedi, we just have no clue at this point. And who specifically was Snoke? We learned Palpatine created Snoke and was behind him, but who exactly was he? We see clues he was some sort of clone from the Snoke bodies and parts we see in the tanks, but it's not fully explored or answered. It's almost just glossed over. Why does Snoke seem decrepit and battle scarred? Is this an imperfection of cloning? This could certainly be the case. Is the original person who was cloned had been Force sensitive, and cloning a Force user was very hard, imperfect, and nearly impossible in the Star Wars universe, as explored by the expanded material. However, this also goes to another point. If Snoke was a clone, who was he cloned from? Jango Fett was the template for the clone army in Attack of the Clones, so who was the genetic template for Snoke? Or was he simply a clone of a normal alien or person Palpatine possessed through dark side magic? We still don't know. Another huge point is how did Palpatine survive in the window between Return of the Jedi to now? We see enough clues to form our own opinion, and I will definitely make a whole video explaining this and the lore, although it seems this will be explored in comics or books coming out in 2020. However, the film doesn't do enough to explain this to the casual fan or viewer who may not retrieve additional Star Wars material to read. He's hooked up to a machine on an arm. Does this machine give some life force fluid to his body to help him survive? Does he use the power of the previous generations of Sith inhabiting his body to extend his life or cheat death? Nothing is fully set in stone, and I believe it was poorly handled. Another question is, who were the Knights of Ren? They were pretty awesome looking and followed Kylo Ren, but when he defected from the dark side and First Order, they attacked him at the end during his confrontation with the Emperor, leading to the question of, were the elite units of Palpatine's Final Order? They're barely featured but give a good sense of mystery, but this one is a huge thing that needs explaining, and they were pretty pointless characters with no backstory. I'm aware there is actually a new comic slightly giving a bit of background information on them, but why is none of this in the movie? Like I keep mentioning, there's a lot of casual fans out there who just don't really get enough information that they deserve. And what was the reason for C-3PO not translating the Sith language for the heroes? Did Palpatine do something to prevent droids from translating it? For an example, Palpatine was behind the manipulation of Anakin, and perhaps his birth through the Force, as presumed in the expanded material. So he could have influenced some kind of encryption through Anakin's mind to his personal droid he built, C-3PO. But this is a far-stretched theory, theory from myself, and nothing's explained in regards in the movie, and it would be kind of unrealistic to think that Palpatine would already have enacted his contingency survival plan after his empire all the way back before the events of the Phantom Menace. It just doesn't seem believable that he'd think this far ahead. To conclude, for the most part, I really enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker. It answered the majority of questions and plot holes from the previous two movies, and made the best of a bad situation from the poor setup from episode 8. I think J.J. Abrams handled the plot well, and made a suitable ending to the trilogy that should mostly sit well with fans. Obviously there's people who are not going to like it, and there's people who are going to be indifferent, and also people who love it. I'm kind of in the middle of indifferent and love. I really enjoyed the movie, but I can also see from the other side the downsides to it. Some moments didn't really feel like Star Wars, but this is perhaps due to the multiple creative visions and the so-called Disney effect, although as a standalone movie it was a spectacle, although it did suffer from the many plot holes it had and that it seemed a little rushed. But for fans of Palpatine and the Emperor, it definitely won't disappoint. I would mostly recommend the movie, and I'm slightly indifferent with it. I enjoyed it, although I can also see the downsides like I mentioned, and the mixed views of the film from both sides of the coin, although it's a movie that's still worth watching and enjoyable in my opinion. I think just going to see the movie just to see Palpatine back in his full immense power is just going to be awesome for people, and I think the very old fans are the ones that may not enjoy it, the fans of the original trilogy, but a lot of the fans who grew up with the George Lucas prequels, like me, in that sort of era, I think they will be the ones who can appreciate Rise of Skywalker. If you loved or hated the movie, let me know about your personal opinion in the comments below. I always read each and every one, and I love to reply and have a discussion with Star Wars fans in the comment section. Let me know about any theories you have about the movie or your favourite or worst parts. If you, like myself, feel many of the plot holes need answering, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I'll be making a whole series of videos going deeper into explaining everything unanswered and the backstory behind many of your favourite characters and events in The Rise of Skywalker. Thanks for watching this video of my review of the movie, and I'll see you next time.